Friends, welcome to Changing Tracks. Today we have with us Philomena. How are you? Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Christine. I'm very happy to be here.
Could you tell us a little bit about yourself, what you are doing now, and about your family?
Right now, I live in Oregon, on the Central Oregon coast, and I have a restaurant there. I go to Sacred Heart Parish there, and my grandson lives with me, and I have 3 children who live in Portland.
What was your life like growing up? Your family, your childhood?
Well, my parents brought me to the United States with my sister and brother when I was 5 years old. That was in 1958. So we lived in Rochester, New York, and both of my parents worked, and they had 3 other children, so there were 6 of us in the family. We moved from Ireland. We came from Limerick City. I was born in Limerick City, and so was my sister Lynn and my brother Noel. So we came my dad came over here the year before and got a job and got everything ready for us. And then my mom brought the 3 of us over.
How old were you then?
I was 5 years old.
How did all this moving around affect your family and their faith? Did your family have a lot of faith when you were growing up?
I believe their faith was probably easier to maintain when they lived in Ireland. When they came to the United States, we went to Catholic school, went to Catholic grade school and high school, and we always went to Mass on Sunday. I do remember in the early days saying the rosary at home, but all of that tapered off over the years, and I think it was very, difficult for my parents to be away from everybody that they knew there.
Do you remember the first time that you really prayed to God?
I remember when I was very young at St. Michael's School, and we had the Sisters of Notre Dame were teaching us, and the sister was teaching us about Jesus in the Eucharist, and she was telling us stories of saints who had given their lives for the Eucharist. And I remember at that time, I look back on that, and I remember thinking, I would do that for Jesus. I would let them take my life. I would never let them take the host from me if I was carrying that. I remember that story. And those sisters they were very holy, they were very devout, and they really tried to teach us.
Did your parents accept their responsibility to form you in the faith? And what was your attitude towards the faith at this time?
My parents really, since they sent us to Catholic school and they had to struggle to pay our tuition, it seemed more like that responsibility was given to the school. And my parents didn't talk a lot about the faith at home, although my mother would have little things she would say, like God only is, God is changeless, we're changing, things like that. But my mother and father, as time went on in the United States, there was a lot of alcohol use in our home, and it created chaos, and different things happened that were difficult for us. It was, my family used to have get-togethers with Irish people at weekends. Some people who lived in Buffalo or Toronto, they would come, and there was a lot of eating and drinking and singing, and that was our life. So it became out of control as time went on. I remember as a teenager, when I was 16, at that time in my life, the drinking age in New York was 18. But I remember drinking with my mother at 16 and my sisters, and it became like an addiction, even though not as much as it did later on in my life. But everything was kind of warped by that non-reality, that this was the important thing. Going to Mass on Sunday was always very important, and I think that was more because of the consequences of a mortal sin, if that makes sense.
During this time when you were in this environment of alcohol and getting drunk and parties, did your conscience ever bother you? Did you ever stop for a minute and think, this isn't right, I shouldn't be doing this?
I think I did. I thought it was okay because that's what we did, because we didn't really mix in so much with other families because we were with all the Irish people. And I used to look up to my dad, and he was a very good man, even though, you know, alcohol became a problem for him, but the real problem was more with my mother. I never really felt like I was right with the church or with God. I always felt like there was something missing, but I wasn't sure what it was, but I just needed to go to Mass, get confession, at least the minimum, and be kind of okay with God. I think I was hiding from him all the time, really, you know.
What kind of friends did you have at that time? How did your friends influence you?
I didn't have a lot of friends. I had one high school friend who influenced me for the bad. We went to Catholic high school as well. It was very different. I just wanted to mention that the sisters in our grade school were very different to the sisters that taught us in high school, and everything became very modern in high school, and a lot of things changed. I graduated from high school in 1971, so a lot of things were changing in the church, and our conscience, the teaching on conscience was, you know, if you don't think it's a sin, it's not a sin, and that type of thing, unfortunately. And I had a friend, and you know, she was about, you know, smoking pot and different things, and I didn't really have a social life as such as it could have been if things were different.
During this time, did you have big plans for your life? What was your ideal? What was your dream?
I had no idea of what my dream was. All I knew was I really wanted to live in Ireland because I never really wanted to leave. And when I left high school, I didn't go to college. I worked at Kodak for a few years, and I met my husband, who was from Ireland. He was a ballad singer, and he was actually from the same city that I was from, and my parents knew who his parents were and things like that. And I married him, and then we actually went to Ireland and lived there for 10 years. In 1980, we lived there for 10 years, and I had my youngest child was born there.
You mentioned before the problems you had with alcohol and all that, but things can happen around you, but they don't necessarily affect you interiorly because you have a strong relationship with God. Now looking back through the eyes of the faith, do you think that alcohol was your biggest problem for your spiritual life, or was there something else?
I don't think, I think the lack of catechesis in the home and the lack of seeing people living their faith, I never had that, and I think as a child I did suffer from some depression because I was kind of a lonely child and I didn't really mix well with others like my sister did, and I'm not really sure. There was a lot of chaos. We were alone a lot because my parents worked, and it was a little scary sometimes, you know. My mother used to have fits of anger, and I would just hide, but somebody else would get hit or something, you know. I mean, I wouldn't call her a child abuser because she was doing the best that she could, but there were it was just a lot of darkness.
Would you say that your lack of formation distanced you from God?
Yeah.
You said you went to Ireland. What happened there?
I went to Ireland, you know, and we used to go to Mass, and my husband, you know, I got married because my husband needed a green card. I hardly knew him. We got married at the courthouse, and then a certain number, like the next year we got married in the church, and I think we were always kind of trying to keep up with the rules and things like that, although we really didn't when we were courting or anything. There was no real respect for the sacrament of marriage. Like, we just had to go to marriage prep, and we just did that, and we got married, and we just like...
Was he Catholic?
Catholic, yes. And when we came back to the United States in 1990, we joined a parish in Virginia, and we even joined a group called Teams of Our Lady. It was for married couples. But there was always just something missing, and I found out later on what it was, you know, as far as my faith, and in retrospect, maybe that's the question, you know, that you're thinking of, what was the missing link? And I think the missing link for me was never really making a good confession, never getting the grace of the sacrament and just going through the motions. And eventually I learned what my problem was, but.
You've told us about your childhood, high school. Did you hit rock bottom? What did you realize when you hit rock bottom? What happened?
What happened, my husband, Brian, is a good man, and we got married, but we both continued on the same patterns as I had in my life, with drinking and getting together with people and music. He was a musician, so it was all about a party kind of thing. Back in 2004, my mom died of cancer, and then after that we opened up a business together in Virginia. And at that point in time, because we were working so much, we just stopped going to Mass, and he drank a lot, and eventually we got divorced. So after that, I moved to Oregon and he stayed in Virginia. I was very far away from God, and I was very prideful, and I wanted things to be my way, and if my husband wasn't going to be a good husband, I wanted to find somebody who would, and the Lord was so far away from me. And I was 50 years old at that point, and I was really uncharitable to him. He was alcoholic, he almost died, but I was not willing to carry that cross, So, I look back, it's easy to see it in hindsight. But when I came out to Oregon, I decided I didn't even believe in God. I didn't want to believe in God. I wanted to live my life the way I wanted it to be, and I didn't want to have to call anything I did a sin.
So you decided to completely reject God. Do you ever remember in the depths of your soul crying out to God, please help me, I don't want to live like this?
Well, I think I was trying to fool myself because actually I started to go back to Mass after the first couple of years, and I came out to Oregon because my friend Dawn, I saw her going to Mass with her son, and then I thought, well, maybe I'll just go to church. And then I started getting back into Mass and confession and different things. And I thought I was doing okay, but I always was missing some link, like the code to get actually to Christ, and I did, as it went on, I did find out. God spoke to me and showed me what was wrong.
During this time, was there someone who you could look to for help, who could tell you maybe what you were doing wrong?
Well, I think I was so much in my sin because it was always like having drinks or going out with men or people, parties, and running. My business was successful, and there was a lot of pride in that, and the wrong kind. And I think I was so much in that world that I didn't even see, I did feel at one point before I had this experience that God had actually moved far away from me. It was a very strange feeling because I know He never leaves us, but I think it was when I was at my lowest, and that would have been before Christmas a few years ago, and then it was at Easter that I learned what God was trying to tell me.
But looking back now, what would you say to someone that might be watching this program right now and feels like God is very far away from them, but they really need Him? What would you say to that person?
I would say to that person, call out to Him, open your heart to Him, ask Him what He wants you to do. We're never alone, and especially in our faith, we have the sacraments. We need the sacraments. Confession, no, we can't live without it.
So, you're in this rebellion against God, you feel like He's far away. How did you draw close to the Lord again? How did the Lord come back into your life again?
Well, I have a very good friend, Dawn Newman. She's my friend, and my grandson and her son kind of spent most of the last 7 or 8 years kind of growing up together in a lot of ways. And I met her because when I came out to Oregon, she was working for the bank that I was doing business with, and she helped me establish a loan there. And then I asked her to help if she would do my books. That's how I met her. So what happened was Dawn was going to Mass and church and everything, and then of course I was going too, and I was being that kind of Catholic, like I say, I was flying under the radar all my life. And then all of a sudden on Easter Vigil 2 Easters ago, we had the boys were serving Mass with our priest, Father Palmer, and at the Easter Vigil, at the consecration, all of a sudden, as the priest is lifting up the host, in my mind, I see this sin from like 40 years ago, maybe more than 40 years ago. And it really shook me. And now I had already been to confession and different things and ready for Easter, the whole thing. So I did not go to Holy Communion. I said to Dawn the next day, I said, I think something's happening to me. I think that maybe I'm going to die or something, because maybe God is trying to show me my life. And that Monday, I went to confession to Father Palmer, and I didn't know him that well because he was new in our parish. And that week, I went to confession every second day. It was like these different things from very, very, very long ago kept coming back. And through that time, all of a sudden, I had to go to Mass every day. I had to pray. I had to read Scripture. I had to do the, the Office of Readings. Like, all of these things were happening to me. And I understand more now after it's been a couple of years. I'm learning, and God was so good to me. Like, He gave me a lot of consolations. Like, I think I needed it because I was so weak that He was drawing me all the time. And as I look back on my life, even before this, before I got divorced and I was working in Reston, Virginia, I worked for a doctor there who was an oral surgeon, and he had 10 children, and he came from Cuba during the time of all the trouble with Castro and everything. And he was a very faithful Catholic. And, all the little seeds that are placed, even when we're not willing to accept it. I look back at him. I used to say, Dr. Madden, don't you get tired of doing this work all the time? And he said, no, it's about people. It's about their souls. Like, he would always talk to people, like, what do you believe in, and the different things. And all of the people who worked with him, he would try to get us out of the cobwebs, and all of that. But what I've learned through this experience is, and I've learned from Father Palmer, because I go to the catechism classes with him and different things, but it's all a process. I had a time months and months later, I was filing for a marriage annulment, and when all these things came up, all these other things came into my mind, and I went to confession. I was so depressed. I was like, here am I, such a sinful person. All these sins are coming into my mind. And I remember talking to the priest that day in the confessional. I said, Father, I don't understand. How can I go to Mass and Communion every day? Now I'm bringing you these things that I never told you. And I'm paraphrasing him, of course, but he was explaining to me that God is so good to us. He doesn't overwhelm us. He brings us, it's a process, all of these things. Like, if we've lived this long life of never really making a good confession, that each of us individually, God is leading us. And went through a lot of struggles that first year, lots of struggles where I could feel forces against me, and I stopped going to work. I just wanted to go to church. I just wanted to be there. I didn't want to see people. And all I can say is, God has been so good to me. He's given me the grace. And I didn't even know about, this is something that I really wish I had known, because I learned this also from Father Palmer. We have to ask God for the grace for every single thing that we do. Like, we don't do anything ourselves. I used to have times where I'm like, I'm not going to drink for 2 years. I can do this. Now I realize anything I do, it has to come from God, because I'm nobody. He's giving us the grace. So I had, during all this experience, I also was able to stop drinking. I had a Saint Charbel intercede for me. Had a relic of Saint Charbel, and I was doing so well in the faith, but I couldn't stop with the alcohol. And I went to the church, to the Maronite church, and I just said, Lord, Saint Charbel, intercede for me. I want to touch the hem of his garment. Take this away from me. And that was almost 2.5 years ago. I walked out of that church and I never looked back. And those kind of things. And it's, just more and more trust in God. But I've had other things too. Just praying for my children. My children don't go to church. They're away from the Catholic Church, I don't know what they believe, but I've been praying for them. And I also had hearing the Lord in my heart say, well, what are you going to do for them? What's your part going to be in this? And I've started doing with food. I said, okay, Lord, I will just eat to live. I won't, indulge. And with His grace.
What do you ultimately owe your conversion to?
I owe my conversion really to the confessional, just spending time in the confessional with a good priest. I will say that I have a very good relationship with our priest, and I consider him my spiritual director. In as much as a way that I could email him a question, like I don't belabor him with my life, but whenever anything comes up where you can tell, either the devil is working on you or something, I always talk to him and I trust him. And the confessional and Holy Communion and exposition of the Blessed Sacrament. I had many experiences when all this happened, going to adoration. Sometimes I just couldn't speak. I just wanted to stay there for hours. And Jesus is calling us to be close to Him, and we can't get any closer than when we receive Him in Holy Communion. So daily Mass for me was, a main thing, and confession. And I never liked to go to confession back in my old life. I really just couldn't do it, but now I love going to confession.
What would you say to someone who is watching this program? They know they need to go to confession, but they're nervous, they're scared, they're just embarrassed by their sin. What would you say to them?
I would say to that person, take that cross on you and go into the confessional and trust the priest to help you through it, because I was terrified to go into that first confession, and I did not know the priest very well, and I was embarrassed, and I felt awful, but the reward, because we're pleasing the Lord, and He's waiting for us all the time, and He wants us to come to Him. He's constantly calling us. So I think that this is what we need. We need to be with God.
Thank you, Philomena. We've run out of time, but thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Thank you for having me, Christina. I loved it.
Friends, confession is so important, and it's so important to have a good confessor. Thanks for joining us today.